The fluorescent lights in Bay 4 had been flickering for 6 hours, and nobody had called maintenance. Maya Chen had stopped noticing it somewhere around hour 3. What she noticed instead was the old man's color, the particular grey-blue of lips that weren't getting enough oxygen, the way his fingers had gone cold while the rest of him was sweating. She noticed the number on the monitor, 84/50 and falling. She noticed that the attending physician, Dr. Hargrove, had stepped away from the bay 12 minutes ago and had not come back. She did not notice the conversation happening at the nurse's station behind her. She would learn about that conversation later. The man had arrived by ambulance at 7:43 p.m. No wallet, no phone, no family member trailing behind with an insurance card. He was wearing a grey cardigan and dark slacks, the kind of clothes that said weekend, not emergency. The paramedics had found him on a bench in Dupont Circle, confused and clutching his chest. He had given them a first name, Raymond. After that, nothing useful. Maya had taken his vitals herself. She had started the IV herself. She had positioned the leads for the EKG with the particular economy of movement that 11 months of overnight shifts had built into her hands, not thinking about what she was doing so much as listening to what the body in front of her was saying. What it was saying was, not enough time. She pulled the crash cart 2 feet closer, not because she thought she'd need it in the next 60 seconds, but because 60 seconds was already too far away if she did. Raymond, she kept her voice level. Can you tell me if you have any heart conditions, any medications you take regularly? He turned his head toward her. His eyes were present in a way that surprised her, sharp even now, even through whatever was happening in his chest. He looked at her the way people look when they are deciding whether to trust someone. Beta blocker, he said. Morning. Forgot. She was already reaching for the chart. The standing protocol for a patient presenting with suspected cardiac event was to notify the attending and wait for authorization before administering anything beyond the initial assessment stabilization. Dr. Hargrove was the attending. Dr. Hargrove had been gone for 12 minutes. Maya had read that protocol. She had signed a document confirming she understood it. She understood it now, standing at the bedside of a man whose pressure was at 81/48, whose lips were the color of a winter sky, who had taken his beta blocker and then forgotten he'd taken it, or forgotten he hadn't, and whose heart was working very hard to do something it was running out of capacity to do. She called out to the charge nurse. She documented the time. She administered the intervention she was trained to administer, in the sequence she was trained to administer it, and she stood at the bedside and watched the monitor and did not look away. At 8:17 p.m., Raymond's pressure was 96/62. At 8:31, it was 108/70. His lips had returned to something closer to the right color. He was still sweating, but differently. The sweat of a body that had just done something very hard and survived it, rather than the sweat of a body losing the argument. He looked at her again with those sharp, present eyes. You didn't wait, he said. No, Maya said. I didn't. She pulled the chair from the corner of the bay and sat down beside him, because he was stable, but not so stable that she was willing to leave. She had a small notebook in her breast pocket. She carried it everywhere, a habit from nursing school she'd never broken, and she set it on her knee without opening it. The light overhead flickered once, twice, and held. The call came before the morning shift change, which meant Patricia Wolfe was still in her office when the Pentagon line rang through. She let it ring twice. Not from hesitation. Patricia Wolfe did not hesitate. But because she had learned, over 22 years in hospital administration, that the 2 seconds before answering a call you were not expecting were sometimes the last 2 seconds of a version of your life you had not yet thought to protect. She picked up on the third ring. The voice on the other end was measured in the way that institutional voices are measured. Not warm, not cold, carrying the specific gravity of someone who delivers information rather than opinions. He identified himself as a liaison from the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He asked whether she was the Chief Administrator of Mercy General. She confirmed that she was. He told her that General Raymond Holloway had been admitted to her facility the previous evening, and that General Holloway had been stabilized by a member of her nursing staff. Patricia said yes, she was aware. The liaison said that General Holloway was currently recovering and had been lucid throughout. He said the general had made a specific request. He said the general would like to know the name of the nurse who treated him, the circumstances under which she had acted, and her current employment status. Patricia's hand did not move on the receiver. Her expression did not change, but something behind it recalibrated, the way a compass needle swings when the magnetic field shifts and there is nothing the needle can do about it. She said she would need to review the matter and call back. The liaison said that would be fine. He gave her a direct number and added, with the same measured neutrality he had maintained throughout, that General Holloway had also asked him to convey something to hospital leadership. He said the general had described the nurse's actions as, quote, the kind of judgment that keeps people alive when systems fail them. Patricia set the phone down and sat for a moment in the particular silence of a decision already made, but not yet spoken. She pulled Maya Chen's file from the stack on her desk. It was thin, 11 months of employment, 1 commendation from a supervising nurse in October, no disciplinary history before Tuesday. The termination notice was on top, unsigned but drafted, waiting for the HR director's counter-signature that afternoon. Patricia read it through once. Then she read the incident report beneath it, the one Dr. Hargrove had filed at 6 that morning, citing scope violations and protocol deviation. The language was precise, institutional, bloodless. The word liability appeared twice. The phrase chain of authorization appeared 3 times. The patient's name did not appear at all. She set both documents on the desk and looked at the window. Outside, the morning was the color of old concrete, the kind of February sky that gives nothing back. She thought about the liaison's voice, the specific weight of it, the way he had said lucid throughout. She thought about Dr. Hargrove's report and the patient's name that wasn't in it. Then she picked up the phone again, not the Pentagon line, her internal line, and called Dr. Hargrove's extension. When he answered, she told him she would need the incident report amended before end of day. She told him the amendment should reflect, with accuracy, the patient's presenting condition and the clinical timeline of intervention. There was a silence on the other end. She said she assumed he understood. He said he did. She ended the call and turned back to Maya Chen's file. She did not touch the termination notice. She moved it carefully to the left side of the desk, separate from the rest. Outside, the first of the morning staff were crossing the parking lot, heads down against the wind, moving toward the entrance with the particular purposefulness of people who have somewhere to be and know exactly what is waiting for them. Patricia Wolfe had 24 hours to decide what version of this story the hospital would be part of. She already knew which one it would be. The termination letter arrived in a standard white envelope, the kind used for utility bills and jury summons. Maya found it in her mailbox on a Wednesday morning, sandwiched between a credit card offer and a grocery circular. She stood on the front step of her apartment building in her coat and read it twice. The language was careful. Contract non-renewal. Operational restructuring. A note about returning her ID badge to Human Resources by Friday. No mention of General Holloway. No mention of Dr. Hargrove. No mention of the Tuesday evening when she had watched a man's blood pressure fall and made the only decision that made sense to her. She folded the letter and put it in her coat pocket and went inside and made coffee. That was the part nobody told you about the price of doing right. It wasn't dramatic. It was a Wednesday. It was coffee going cold on the counter while you sat at your kitchen table with a laptop open to a job search site, trying to remember whether your most recent performance review had said exceptional or exemplary, because the word mattered when you were writing a cover letter and suddenly needed to make 11 months sound like a career. She called her mother that evening, told her the contract hadn't been renewed. Used the passive voice deliberately, because her mother would ask fewer questions that way. Her mother asked anyway. Maya said there had been a disagreement about procedure. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said that Maya had always been too stubborn for her own good, and that stubbornness was both her best quality and her most expensive one. Maya didn't argue. She wasn't sure her mother was wrong. The days had a texture she hadn't expected. She'd worked since she was 16, waitressing, then hospital admin, then nursing school, then the floor at Mercy General. And the absence of a schedule felt less like freedom than like a room with the furniture removed. She woke at the same time she always had, 6:15. Lay in the dark for a while, cataloguing the day ahead, and then remembered there wasn't one. Not the way there used to be. She went to the gym, she walked, she sat in a coffee shop near DuPont Circle, and revised her resume and watched people who had somewhere to be move past the window. 2 former colleagues texted in the first week. Both messages were warm and vague and contained no offer of reference or contact. She understood. The hospital was not a small place, but professional circles had a way of contracting around people who had been made inconvenient. She wrote back to both of them, said she was fine, said she hoped to catch up soon, did not press. She applied to 4 positions in the first 10 days, 2 at other hospitals in the district, 1 at a private outpatient clinic in Arlington, 1 at a federally contracted healthcare facility that had posted a listing that seemed almost exactly suited to her experience. She heard nothing from any of them, told herself that was normal, applied to 3 more. On the 11th day, she drove to Mercy General to return her badge. She had planned to leave it with the front desk and go. Instead, she sat in the parking structure for 14 minutes with the engine running, looking at the building's entrance. The same automatic doors she had walked through more than 200 times. The same lobby she had crossed in scrubs at 6 in the morning with a coffee she'd never had time to finish. She thought about the man in Bay 4, the blue tinge at his lips, the number she had read on the monitor, and the decision she had made in the space between one heartbeat and the next. She did not regret it. That was the part she kept returning to, pressing on it the way you press on a bruise to confirm it's still there. She did not regret it. She got out of the car, crossed the lot, and handed her badge to a woman at the front desk who didn't recognize her. Nobody stopped her on the way out. The termination letter was 1 page. Maya had read it 4 times, and it was still 1 page. She folded it along the original crease and set it on the kitchen counter beside her coffee mug. Outside, the November light came through the window at its flat November angle, grey and unhelpful. She had nowhere to be. This was the first Tuesday in 11 months she had nowhere to be. She opened her laptop and pulled up her resume. The document looked thin in a way it hadn't before, not because anything had changed in it, but because she was reading it differently now. 11 months of experience at Mercy General. She typed the end date, stared at it, closed the laptop. The thing no one told you about losing a job was how loud the apartment got. Not with noise, with time. It accumulated in the corners of rooms, gathered in the spaces between tasks. She did laundry. She reorganized the cabinet above the refrigerator. She called her mother, kept it brief, said the word transition twice and fine 3 times, and got off the phone before anything real could be asked of her. Her clinical skills bag was still hanging by the front door where she'd left it Sunday night, packed and ready for a shift that hadn't happened. She walked past it on Wednesday morning without touching it. By Wednesday afternoon, she moved it to the closet shelf because looking at it had started to feel like a kind of cruelty she was inflicting on herself. She had done the right thing. She knew that with a clarity that sat in her chest like something calcified. Hard, permanent, without comfort. The man's pressure had been dropping. The window was minutes, not hours. There was no version of that Tuesday where she stood at the threshold of that bay, watched the numbers fall, and waited for a phone call to finish before she moved. She had done the right thing, and it had cost her the only thing she'd wanted since she was 19 years old and sitting in a hospital waiting room watching a nurse, not a doctor, a nurse, take her grandmother's hand and say, without flinching, "I've got you." She updated her resume on Wednesday evening. She sent 3 applications by Thursday morning. Not because she was ready, but because the alternative was to keep sitting in the apartment with the accumulated quiet and the cabinet she'd reorganized and the bag on the shelf that she still hadn't unpacked. Her phone rang Thursday afternoon, a number she didn't recognize. She let it ring. It rang again 20 minutes later, same number. She answered it on the 3rd call. Friday morning. The kind of grey November light that made the whole city look administrative. The voice on the other end introduced itself and then said words she didn't immediately assemble into meaning. Pentagon. Official channels. General Holloway, the nurse who treated him. She was standing in the kitchen. Her hand found the counter. The voice continued. Formal, precise, without excess. The general had been asking. The general had been specific. The voice said the word exceptional, and then said it again in a different sentence, in a different context, and both times she didn't know what to do with it, so she wrote it down on the back of the termination letter, which was still folded on the counter beside the coffee mug. After she hung up, she stood there for a moment without moving. The coffee in the mug had gone cold 2 hours ago. The termination letter was in her hand. On the back of it, in her own handwriting, exceptional judgment, asked us to convey, and then in smaller letters, because she had run out of room at the edge of the page, why she no longer works there. She set the letter down. She looked at the closed closet door where the clinical bag sat on the shelf, still packed. She didn't unpack it. The call came in at 9:14 on a Thursday morning, and Patricia Wolfe took it in her office with the door closed. The voice on the other end identified itself as belonging to Colonel James Reardon, Office of the Secretary of Defense, and it was the kind of voice that did not apologize for the hour or ask whether she had a moment. Patricia had been hospital administrator for 11 years. She knew institutional authority when she heard it. She sat down. Colonel Reardon spoke for 4 minutes without interruption. He identified the patient from Tuesday evening as General Raymond Holloway, United States Army, retired 4-star, currently serving as senior medical advisor to a classified DoD health infrastructure panel. He noted that General Holloway had been transported to Mercy General following a cardiac episode while attending a private function 2 blocks from the hospital. He noted that the general had been stabilized by nursing staff before the on-call cardiologist arrived. He noted, with the measured precision of someone reading from a document they had prepared, that General Holloway had a clear and detailed recollection of the care he received. Then he said, "The general would like to know the name of the nurse who treated him." Patricia's pen was in her hand. She had not written anything. She told Colonel Reardon she would need to review the incident records and return his call. Reardon gave her a direct number. He also mentioned, before ending the call, that General Holloway had specifically asked whether the nurse was still on staff. The question was not phrased as a threat. It didn't need to be. Patricia set the phone down and looked at the window for a long moment. Outside, a maintenance crew was doing something to the parking structure. She could hear the machinery but not see it. She called her deputy administrator, then her head of nursing, then her legal counsel. The 3 of them were in her office within 20 minutes, and she told them what Colonel Reardon had told her, and then she placed the personnel file on the table between them. Maya Chen. 11 months of service. Contract non-renewal processed the previous morning, effective in 14 days. The legal counsel asked if the Pentagon had made any specific requests beyond the name inquiry. Patricia said not explicitly. The head of nursing, a woman named Sandra Okafor, who had worked at Mercy General for 19 years, picked up Maya's file and read through it without expression. When she finished, she set it back down and said only that the termination decision had been made in less than 12 hours. No one said anything for a moment. The maintenance machinery outside continued its low, indifferent grinding. Patricia Wolfe had built her career on making decisions that protected the institution. She understood, with the kind of clarity that arrives when the consequences become concrete, that protecting the institution now meant something different than it had meant 48 hours ago. The calculus had not changed so much as it had simply become visible. She called Colonel Reardon back at 10:52 a.m. She provided the name. She also informed him that the hospital was in the process of reviewing the personnel decision related to that nurse and expected to have an update within 24 hours. Reardon thanked her. He mentioned that General Holloway would be pleased to hear the hospital was taking the matter seriously. The call lasted 6 minutes. Patricia sat alone after it ended. On her desk, beside the phone, was the organizational chart she'd approved 3 months ago, the one with Dr. Hargrove's name in the upper tier of the ER hierarchy. She looked at it for a moment, then turned it face down. Then she pulled Maya Chen's file toward her and began to read it from the beginning, this time without interruption. Patricia Wolfe had not eaten lunch. Her assistant had brought a sandwich at noon, and she had set it on the corner of her desk without looking at it, and now it was 3 in the afternoon, and the bread had gone slightly stiff, and she still had not looked at it. The call had come through the main administrative line, which was unusual. Pentagon inquiries typically arrived through legal or through the hospital's government liaison office, routed and softened and stripped of anything that sounded like urgency by the time they reached her. This one had not been routed. A man identifying himself as the office of the Deputy Surgeon General of the Army had asked for her by name, by title, and then had asked whether she was the administrator who had authorized the non-renewal of a contract for a registered nurse by the name of Maya Chen. She had said yes. The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds. Patricia Wolfe had been running hospitals for 19 years, and she knew what 4 seconds of silence from a Pentagon extension sounded like. The man's voice, when it returned, was not unkind. That was the part she kept returning to. He had not threatened her. He had not raised his voice. He had simply explained, in the measured and deliberate cadence of someone who had delivered difficult information before and expected it to be received without argument, that General Raymond Holloway had been admitted to Mercy General 3 nights prior. That General Holloway was a 4-star general, retired, currently serving in an advisory capacity to the Department of Defense. That General Holloway had been in and out of consciousness for portions of his treatment, but had been sufficiently lucid to observe and to retain, and that General Holloway had asked the Pentagon, specifically and personally, to locate the nurse who had sat with him. Patricia had written down Maya Chen's name on her legal pad, though she already knew it. The man from the Pentagon had then said something she had not expected. He had said that General Holloway would like to know why the nurse no longer worked there. It was a question that was not a question. Patricia had looked at the sandwich. She had looked at the legal pad. She had looked at the framed photograph on her wall of the hospital's new East Wing, which bore a brass plaque with the name of a congressional donor who sat on 3 military appropriations subcommittees. She said she would look into it personally. The man thanked her and ended the call. For 7 minutes she sat without moving. Then she picked up her phone and called Human Resources, and then she called Legal, and then she called Dr. Hargrove's extension and listened to it ring 4 times before it went to voicemail, and she set the handset down without leaving a message. The non-renewal paperwork was on her desk within the hour. She read through it once, slowly, in the way she read documents she was preparing to dismantle rather than defend. The language was clean. It cited protocol deviation. It cited scope of practice. It cited, in one carefully constructed sentence, the disruption to established admission procedure for priority patients. She picked up a pen and held it over the paper for a moment. What the paperwork did not cite, because paperwork of this nature never cited such things directly, was that Dr. Hargrove had called her at 9:47 that evening to say that a nurse had gotten to the patient first, and that Patricia had said, without asking the nurse's name, that she would handle it. She had handled it in the way institutions handle the inconvenient, cleanly, quietly, and without ceremony. She had not known who the patient was. That was the part she could not stop turning over. She had not known, which meant the decision she made had not been about General Holloway at all. It had simply been the kind of decision she made routinely, the kind that kept the machinery running, the kind that had a dozen small justifications and no single one that could survive being read aloud in a room where someone was listening carefully. She signed the reversal form and set it in her outbox. Then she picked up the sandwich and threw it away. General Raymond Holloway had insisted on meeting her in a conference room on the 3rd floor, not his private suite. His aide had explained this without elaborating. Maya understood it anyway. A man like Holloway did not conduct serious conversations in rooms where he was the patient. She arrived 2 minutes early. He was already there. He sat at the head of a table that seated 12, but there were only 2 chairs pulled out, his and the one directly to his left. Not across, beside. She noticed that. He was dressed in civilian clothes again, a grey cardigan over a collared shirt, and he looked smaller than she remembered from the night she'd worked over him in Bay 4. Men often did, once the emergency passed. What remained, once you removed the crisis, was just a person. He stood when she entered. She hadn't expected that. "Nurse Chen," he said. "General Holloway." He gestured toward the chair and waited until she sat before he did. Old habit, she thought. Rank expressing itself as courtesy. For a moment he simply looked at her, not appraising exactly, but measuring something she didn't have a name for. Then he folded his hands on the table and said, "I'm told they let you go." "My contract wasn't renewed," she said. "There's a distinction, technically." "There isn't," he said. "Not in practice." She didn't argue. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want you to answer it honestly, not politely. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." "When you started treatment that night, when you made the call to move without waiting, did you know there was a protocol in place? That administration had asked for a delay?" The question landed the way she'd known it would eventually. She'd rehearsed a dozen versions of this answer in the 3 days she'd spent not working. She set all of them aside. "No," she said. "I didn't know. But I want to be precise about that, because I think the precision matters. I didn't know, and I'm not certain it would have changed what I did. Your pressure was dropping. You were confused and in pain. Everything I was trained to do pointed one direction." He nodded once, slowly. "That's the honest answer," he said. "You asked for the honest one." Something shifted in his face, not a smile exactly, but the precursor to one that he decided not to complete. He looked down at his folded hands, then back at her. "The people who hesitated to help me," he said, "were protecting their positions. I understand that. I've spent 40 years inside institutions that run on exactly that logic. I've participated in it." He said this without apparent shame, which she found more credible than remorse would have been. "But you were doing something else entirely." She waited. "You were just trying to save a life," he said. "That's the only thing that should ever matter in a hospital." The room was very quiet. Somewhere below them, an elevator opened and closed. Maya looked at this man who had spent 4 decades at the center of the machinery that built and dismantled careers with equal efficiency, who had asked to meet her not across a table, but beside one, who had stood when she walked in, and she thought about what it cost a person to say a thing that simply, that directly, after a life spent inside systems that punished simplicity. "Thank you," she said. It was insufficient. It was the only true thing she had. He reached across and placed one hand briefly over hers. 2 seconds, perhaps 3, and then withdrew it. "They're reinstating you," he said. "I believe there's a formal apology as well." He said this with the faint dryness of a man who had written a few formal apologies himself and understood their limitations. "I heard," she said. "Good." He pushed back his chair. "Then go back to work." The hospital's Ethics Review Board met on the first Thursday of every month in a conference room on the 4th floor, a room with windows that faced east and caught the morning light in long, pale rectangles across the table. Maya arrived early, as she always did. She set her folder at her designated seat, third from the left, the newest chair, and poured herself coffee from the carafe that someone on the administrative staff always left without being asked. She was 31 years old. The next youngest member of the board was 54. The case before them that morning involved a consent protocol dispute in the oncology unit, a patient's family contesting the documentation timeline, claiming the attending had obtained signature before fully explaining the treatment risks. It was the kind of case that looked straightforward on paper and was not straightforward at all. Maya had read the file twice the night before, made notes in the margins, crossed some out, made others. When her turn came to speak, she did not begin with her conclusion. She began with the consent form itself, with the specific language in the third paragraph, which was technically compliant and practically insufficient. She had flagged the same language in 2 other forms, that quarter. She put the comparison documents on the table. The board chair, Dr. Emil Reyes, read the comparison without speaking. The room was quiet in the way rooms get when something on paper refuses to stay on paper. "You're suggesting a language revision," he said. "I'm suggesting the current language allows physicians to satisfy the letter of the requirement without satisfying its purpose," Maya said. "Which means this case isn't an anomaly, it's a symptom." No one disagreed, not vocally. One member shifted in his chair, another made a note. The revision was tabled for formal drafting at the next session. The oncology case was resolved in the patient family's favor, not dramatically, but specifically. The timeline was flagged. The attending received a formal guidance notice. The record was amended. Maya gathered her documents afterward. Dr. Reyes lingered at the door. "The language comparison," he said. "How long did that take you?" "A few hours." He nodded once. "You know you didn't have to do that. The case could have been decided without it." "I know," she said. He left without saying anything further. That was how she understood it was a compliment. She took the elevator back down to the 3rd floor, changed into her scrubs, and walked into the start of her shift. Bay 4 had a pediatric admit, 7 years old, respiratory distress. She went directly there. The child's name was Daniel. He was frightened, and the oxygen mask made it worse. Maya sat at the edge of the bed, not above it, and spoke to him at eye level until his breathing slowed. She adjusted the flow rate. She checked the monitor. She stayed until the numbers settled into something that looked like safe. His mother stood at the foot of the bed, her hands pressed together. "Is he going to be okay?" Maya looked at the monitor, then at Daniel, then at his mother. "His numbers are moving in the right direction," she said. "I'll check back in 20 minutes and I'll tell you exactly what I see." She did, both times. On her break, she sat in the staff lounge, with her folder still in her bag and her coffee gone cold, and she thought about nothing in particular for 4 minutes, which was all the time she had. Then she went back. The ethics board folder stayed in her bag until next month. The consent language revision would take 3 sessions to finalize. She would push for the stronger version each time. In the elevator, going back up to Bay 4 at the end of a double shift, she caught her reflection in the steel door. The badge clipped to her chest read her name, her unit, her credentials. It did not read youngest, it did not read last. It read exactly what she was. She had earned that, at considerable cost, and she intended to keep it.